There is a moment, right now, in your life, where someone is testing you. They said something cruel, they left you on red, they smiled at you in the meeting, and then cut you down in the email 5 minutes later. And you are sitting there, replaying it, drafting the comeback, rehearsing the explanation, building the case for why you were right and they were wrong. Stop, because the moment you do that, you lose. Niccolo Machiavelli did not write The Prince to teach kings how to be kind. He wrote it to teach them how to survive in a world that does not reward kindness. He studied power the way a surgeon studies a body, without sentiment, without flinching, looking only at what works and what gets you killed. And buried inside that 500-year-old text are 7 laws. 7 laws about reaction, about silence, about the cost of explaining yourself to people who never deserved an explanation in the first place. Today, you are going to learn all 7. The first one will make you uncomfortable because you have been breaking it your entire life. The 4th one is the one most people get backwards, and it is quietly destroying their relationships. And the 7th law, the last one, is the one Machiavelli himself called the difference between a prince who rules for decades and a prince who is forgotten in a year. If you only remember one law from this video, it needs to be that one. So stay with me, because I am going to build to it, piece by piece, and by the end, you will see your entire life differently. Let's begin. Law 1. Never react. I want you to think of the last time someone provoked you on purpose. Maybe it was a coworker who made a comment in front of everyone, designed to make you small. Maybe it was a partner who knew exactly which words would make you raise your voice. Maybe it was a stranger online, hiding behind a screen, who said something engineered to pull a reaction out of you, and you gave it to them. Here is what Machiavelli understood that most people never will. Reaction is information. Every time you react, every flinch, every raised voice, every defensive word, you are handing the other person a map of your insides. You are showing them exactly where the wound is, and now they know where to press next time. This is not about suppressing emotion. Machiavelli was not a robot, and neither are you. This is about timing. There is a difference between feeling something and performing it on command for someone else's benefit. Think about the calmest person you have ever met, the one who, no matter what chaos surrounded them, never seemed to be pulled off center. Did that make you respect them more or less? You respected them more, because calm, in the presence of provocation, reads as power. It reads as control. It reads as someone operating on a level the provoker cannot reach. And provocateurs, the people who try to bait you, they are not actually trying to win an argument. Read that again. They are trying to make you lose your composure, because your composure is the only thing standing between them and control over you. The moment you react instantly, you've told them, this works, do it again. So what does Machiavelli suggest instead? Delay, not forever, strategically. Create a gap between the provocation and your response. In that gap, you decide what serves you, not what soothes your ego in the next 10 seconds. Here is a phrase to remember. The first response is rarely the right response. The first response is the wounded animal. The second response, the one that comes after you've taken a breath, after you've let the moment pass, that is the prince. That is the one in control. Let me give you a real scenario, because abstract advice is easy to agree with and hard to actually use. Picture a family dinner. Someone makes a comment about your career, your weight, your relationship status, dressed up as a joke but landing like a blade. Everyone at the table goes quiet, half laughing, waiting to see what you'll do. The old you, the reactive you, fires back immediately, maybe with a joke of your own, sharper, meant to wound in return. Maybe with a flash of anger that makes you look unstable in front of people whose opinion you actually cared about 30 seconds ago. Either way, you've now become the story of the dinner, not them, you. Here's what the prince does instead. The prince lets the comment sit in the air for 1 full second longer than feels comfortable. Just 1 second. Long enough that the person who said it starts to feel the absence of your reaction more than they would have felt the presence of one. Then the prince changes the subject, or simply says, interesting, and moves on. Voice level, face unreadable. I promise you that 1 second of silence does more damage to a provocateur's ego than any comeback you could craft. Because a comeback tells them you were listening closely enough to be hurt. Silence tells them you weren't listening closely enough to care. This is the part people misunderstand about emotional control. It is not the absence of feeling. You will still feel the sting. You are allowed to feel it fully, later, in private, or with someone who has earned the right to see you process it. But the provocateur, the person who does not deserve a window into your inner world, only gets to see the outside. And the outside, from now on, stays calm. I want you to picture someone in your life right now, someone who knows how to get under your skin. Picture their face. Picture the last thing they said that made your blood rise. Now imagine yourself not reacting. Imagine the silence stretching out and watch their confusion in your mind. Watch them not knowing what to do with a person who didn't flinch. That image, hold on to that, because that is the person you are about to become over the next 40 minutes. Law 2, never explain. This is the law that will sting the most, because most of us were raised to believe the opposite. We were taught that if we are misunderstood, we owe people clarity. We were taught that a good person explains themselves. Machiavelli would tell you this is a trap, and a deeply costly one. Here is the truth. Explanations are only valuable to people who are operating in good faith. If someone has already decided who you are, if they've made up their mind about your character, your motives, your worth, your explanation does not change their mind. It only gives them more material to use against you. Think about it. Have you ever explained yourself to someone who clearly wasn't listening to understand, but listening to find the next thing to criticize? You gave them a paragraph. They picked 1 sentence out of it, twisted it, and threw it back at you. And now you're explaining your explanation. And now you're smaller than when you started. This is the trap of over-explaining. It signals desperation. It signals that their opinion of you has more power over you than your own opinion of yourself. Powerful people, the ones who actually hold influence in a room, rarely explain themselves to their critics, not because they're arrogant, because they understand something most people don't. Explanation is for people who've earned it. Your boss who genuinely wants to understand your decision-making, earned it. Your partner who's hurt and needs clarity to feel safe, earned it. A stranger on the internet who decided you're the villain in their story for entertainment, has not earned it. The coworker who twists your words in every meeting, has not earned it. Here's the part most people miss. When you stop explaining yourself to people who don't deserve it, something strange happens. They get louder for a little while, because your silence is unfamiliar to them and they don't know what to do with it. But then they get quieter, because an explanation gives a conflict oxygen. Silence starves it. I need you to sit with a question for a second. Who in your life are you currently over-explaining yourself to? Who have you sent that long text message to, trying to make them understand your side, when deep down you knew they had already decided not to understand? That energy, that explanation you were about to give them, Machiavelli would tell you to spend it elsewhere. Spend it building something. Spend it on the 3 people in your life who would actually hear you. Let me give you an example that might feel close to home. Imagine you make a decision at work. You turn down a project, or you push back on a process, and a coworker who has never once supported you starts questioning it in front of others, fishing for a reaction, fishing for justification. Most people, in that moment, panic into explanation mode. They lay out every reason, every justification, hoping that enough logic will finally satisfy the questioner. But here's what actually happens. The more you explain, the more it looks like you're justifying a mistake, even if you made the right call. Explanation, in that context, performs guilt, whether or not guilt is actually present. The prince does something different. The prince says simply, "I made the decision that made sense for the situation," and stops there. No paragraph, no justification chain, no evidence trail laid out for a jury that already decided the verdict before the trial started. Watch what happens next. The questioner, deprived of the material they were fishing for, often escalates briefly, maybe a follow-up question, a slightly louder tone, trying to bait the explanation out of you, and you simply repeat the same calm sentence, or you say nothing further at all. Within a few exchanges, the room notices something, not weakness, the opposite. They notice you didn't need to defend yourself, and unconsciously, that reads as someone who didn't have anything to defend. This is the part that takes real practice, because it goes against decades of social conditioning. We are taught silence equals guilt, but silence, deployed correctly, equals confidence. The difference is in your posture, your eye contact, your stillness, not in how many words you produce. Because here is the uncomfortable secret. The people who deserve your explanation rarely demand one. They give you the benefit of the doubt. It is almost always the people who do not deserve it who demand it the loudest. Remember that distinction. We are going to come back to it. Law 3. Never reveal your next move. Now we move into something slightly different. The first two laws were about what you hold back emotionally. This third law is about what you hold back strategically. Machiavelli wrote about princes who lost their kingdoms not because their enemies were stronger, but because their enemies knew what they were going to do before they did it. Think about poker for a second. The worst poker players are not the ones with bad cards. They're the ones whose faces tell the table everything. Their excitement when they draw a good hand, their disappointment when they don't. They are an open book, and an open book gets read by everyone at the table, except them. You are playing a version of this game every single day, whether you realize it or not. When you announce your plans before you've executed them, your business idea, your plan to leave a relationship, your intention to ask for a raise, your decision to cut someone off, you give every person around you time to prepare a response. Time to undermine you, time to beat you to it, time to talk you out of it. I want you to think about the times in your life you told someone your big plan and watched their face change. Maybe it was subtle, maybe it was a flicker of jealousy disguised as concern. Are you sure that's a good idea? Have you really thought this through? And maybe, that conversation planted just enough doubt that you slowed down or stopped entirely. That is not always malicious, by the way. Sometimes people doubt your plans because they genuinely love you and fear you'll be hurt. But Machiavelli would tell you this doesn't matter. Intent doesn't change outcome. The outcome was the same either way. Your momentum got interrupted by someone else's reaction to information they didn't need yet. Here's the law in practice. Build in silence. Move in silence. Let your results speak before your intentions do. There is enormous power in someone realizing what you did after it's already done, rather than someone having the chance to stop it while it was still forming. This does not mean you become secretive with everyone in your life, all the time, about everything. That's not strength, that's isolation. This means you become deliberate about who earns early access to your plans, and you understand that broadcasting your next move to people who haven't proven they're rooting for you is handing them a weapon, free of charge. Ask yourself honestly, who in your life have you been telling your plans to, who has never once celebrated when those plans succeeded? That person does not need to know what you're building next. Let me make this concrete with something many of you are living through right now. You're unhappy in a relationship. You've started to think, quietly, about leaving. And the temptation, the very human temptation, is to talk about it, to process it out loud with a friend who happens to also be close with your partner, to drop hints to your partner themselves, hoping they'll change before you have to make the harder choice. Here's what almost always happens when you do that. The hints get noticed, and instead of triggering real change, they trigger damage control. Suddenly there's a grand gesture, a promise, a temporary version of the partner you'd actually wanted all along, just enough to make you doubt your own clarity, just enough to delay the decision another 6 months, another year. Machiavelli's third law says something harder, but more honest. If you've truly decided something needs to change, decide it fully, privately, before you ever say a word. Let your decision become solid first. Then, when you do act, whether that's having the real conversation, setting the real boundary, or actually walking away, you're acting from a place of resolved clarity, not from a place that can be talked out of itself by someone skilled at reading your hesitation. The same applies to ambition. The friend who hears your business idea and immediately points out every flaw, every risk, every reason it might fail, that friend isn't necessarily your enemy, but their doubt, heard too early, before your own conviction has had time to harden, can plant a seed that grows roots in exactly the soil where your motivation used to live. Protect the seed. Let it grow somewhere private first. Law 4. Withdraw affection before you withdraw respect. This is the law I mentioned at the start, the one most people get backwards. Here's what most people do. When someone hurts them, they get cold immediately, distant, sharp. They make sure the other person feels their displeasure, feels the withdrawal of warmth right away. And then, only much later, sometimes never, does respect actually leave. Machiavelli understood human psychology in the opposite order, and it's the order that actually protects you. When you withdraw warmth too early, when you get cold and punishing the moment you're hurt, you are still emotionally entangled. You're still trying to make them feel something. You're still, in a strange way, seeking a reaction from them. That's not power. That's hurt wearing a mask of anger. True power looks different. It looks like staying outwardly composed, even warm, even civil, while quietly, internally, recalibrating how much respect, trust, and access this person has actually earned. Think of it this way. Coldness is loud. It announces, "You hurt me," to everyone in the room. But recalibrated respect, the quiet decision that someone no longer gets the same trust, the same vulnerability, the same access to your time, that is silent. And silence is something people cannot argue with, cannot manipulate, cannot apologize their way out of, because they don't even know it's happening until they notice the distance that's already there. Here's why this matters so much. If you let someone see your coldness immediately, you give them a chance to perform an apology, smooth things over, and go right back to behaving the same way. Because the consequence they experienced was temporary discomfort, not an actual loss of standing in your life. But if your warmth stays consistent on the surface, while your internal respect recalibrates underneath, they cannot perform their way back into the access they lost. There's nothing to apologize to. There's no scene to fix. The respect simply isn't there anymore, and they slowly realize it through your actions over time, not your tone in the moment. I want you to think of someone who hurt you, and then charmed their way back into your life, only to hurt you again. I'd guess they're not hard to picture. That cycle exists because you led with cold withdrawal, which can be repaired with charm, instead of quiet internal recalibration, which can only be repaired by actually changing. This is not about becoming manipulative or cruel. It's about protecting your actual respect, the precious thing, the rare thing, by not announcing its movements to people who have proven they'll exploit the warning. Here's a scenario to make this land. A friend cancels on you, last minute, for the third time in a row, always for something that sounds suspiciously more fun than whatever you'd planned together. The old pattern goes like this. You send a cold text, short, clipped, "Fine, whatever, no worries," said in the tone that makes it obvious you mean the opposite. They sense it. They apologize, maybe over-apologize, maybe show up with a small gift or an extra warm hug next time you see them. You feel slightly better, and 3 weeks later, they cancel again. Because nothing about the actual dynamic changed, only your temporary discomfort was soothed. Now picture the alternative. You respond to the cancellation warmly, easily, no visible sting at all. No worries, have fun. And internally, quietly, you simply stop being the friend who clears your whole evening for them. You stop being available on a moment's notice. You don't announce a new boundary. You just become slightly harder to reach, slightly less central in your own planning. They will likely never even clock the exact moment it happened, but over time, they'll notice that you've become busier, that you're not as easy to lock down, that the access they used to take for granted simply isn't there in the same way anymore. That is respect being quietly recalibrated. No tears, no confrontation, no scene. Just an internal ledger being updated, accurately, based on actual behavior rather than promised intentions. We are at the midpoint, and I want to pause here for one moment, because something interesting is happening in your mind right now. Some part of you is nodding along, recognizing yourself in every law so far, the times you overreacted, the times you over-explained, the plans you announced too early, the coldness you showed too soon. And another part of you, if you're honest, feels a small resistance, a voice saying, "Isn't this all a little cold? A little calculated? Shouldn't we just be good to people?" I'm not going to pretend that tension doesn't exist, because pretending would be dishonest. and I respect you too much for that. Here's where I actually land on it. Machiavelli is not a guide to becoming heartless. He's a guide to making sure your warmth, your goodness, your openness, the things that make you genuinely worth knowing, don't get drained dry by people who never had any intention of reciprocating them. There is a difference between being kind and being available for exploitation. Most people who get hurt over and over again aren't hurt because they're bad judges of character. They're hurt because nobody ever taught them there's a third option between trust everyone and trust no one. That third option is strategy. That third option is exactly what we're building today. So if part of you feels resistance to what's coming next, good. Hold on to that resistance. Question it. But stay with me, because the next 3 laws are where this entire framework comes together, and the 7th law, the one I promised you at the very beginning, changes how you'll see every relationship you have for the rest of your life. Law 5, let them underestimate you. Here is something almost nobody tells you about power. Being underestimated is a gift, if you know how to use it. Machiavelli wrote extensively about princes who survived precisely because their enemies thought they were weaker, less clever, or less ambitious than they actually were. The ones who got destroyed were almost always the ones who announced their strength too loudly, too early, before they had the actual power to back it up. Think about your own life. Has there ever been a moment where someone dismissed you, underestimated your intelligence, your ambition, your capability, and it actually worked in your favor? Where their dismissal meant they weren't watching you closely, weren't preparing for you, weren't threatened by you. That underestimation was armor, and most people spend their entire lives trying to rip that armor off by proving everyone wrong as loudly and as fast as possible. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The loudest, watch me prove you wrong energy usually backfires because it announces your trajectory to people who can now interfere with it. The quiet version, letting them keep their low opinion of you while you build in the background, is so much more powerful, because by the time they realize what happened, it's already done. This requires something difficult: ego control. It means tolerating being misjudged. It means biting your tongue when someone insults your potential, instead of launching into a defense of your future plans. I want you to picture a specific person who underestimated you, someone who made you feel small, or dismissed what you were capable of. I want you to feel that sting again, just for a second. Now I want you to ask yourself, did you spend more energy convincing them they were wrong, or actually becoming undeniable? Because those are 2 completely different paths, and only one of them ends with you holding real power. The other one ends with you still seeking their approval, just from a different angle. Let people underestimate you. Let it happen. Let them feel comfortable, relaxed, unthreatened, and build, quietly, in the space their underestimation gives you. There's a version of this that plays out constantly in workplaces, and I want you to really see it. 2 people started a company at the same time. One of them is loud about their ambition from day one, talks about the promotion they're aiming for, the title they want, the timeline they've set for themselves. The other one says almost nothing about their ambitions, smiles, does competent work, and lets people assume they're simply happy where they are. Watch what happens over the following 2 years. The loud one becomes a target, not necessarily through anyone's conscious malice, just through the simple mechanics of human nature. People start measuring themselves against the loud one's stated goals. Subtle resistance appears. Their ideas get questioned a little harder. Their mistakes get remembered a little longer. They've made themselves the obvious competitor, and obvious competitors get blocked. The quiet one, meanwhile, is gathering relationships, skills, and institutional trust without anyone feeling threatened by it. When the opportunity for advancement actually appears, the quiet one is the unexpected choice, the one nobody saw coming because nobody was watching closely enough to see it coming. That is the power of being underestimated. It is not weakness. It is camouflage with a purpose. Law 6. Generosity is a weapon, not just a virtue. This law tends to make people uncomfortable because it sounds cynical on the surface. But stay with me, because underneath it is something genuinely useful for protecting your own life. Machiavelli observed that generosity, when given indiscriminately, doesn't just fail to win loyalty, It can actively destroy a leader. Why? Because people don't remember generosity. They adjust to it. What was a gift yesterday becomes an expectation tomorrow. And the moment you can't sustain that level of giving, you're no longer seen as generous. You're seen as someone who let them down. I'd bet you've lived this. Think of a time you went above and beyond for someone, over and over, and then one day, exhausted or simply unable to keep up the same pace, you did slightly less. And instead of gratitude for everything before, you got resentment for the one time you didn't show up the same way. That's not because the other person is necessarily a bad person. It's because indiscriminate generosity trains people to expect, not appreciate. Machiavelli's insight is that generosity needs to be deliberate, targeted, and visible at the right moments, not constant and automatic. When you give strategically to people who reciprocate, who notice, who treat it as the gift it is, that generosity builds genuine loyalty and respect. When you give automatically to everyone, regardless of how they treat you, you're not being virtuous. You're being predictable. And predictable people get used. This is hard to hear if you're someone who prides yourself on being generous, on always showing up, always saying yes, always being the one who gives more than you receive. I'm not telling you to stop being generous. I'm telling you to stop being generous on autopilot. Ask yourself, who in your life has never once reciprocated your generosity? Not even with simple gratitude. And who has matched it, expanded it, made you feel like giving to them was actually building something between you? Direct your energy toward the second group. Let the first group experience the natural consequence of a well that eventually runs dry for them specifically. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Think about the family member who calls only when they need something. Money, a favor, a place to stay, a problem solved. For years, maybe you've answered every single time, dropped what you were doing, given without hesitation, because that's the kind of person you are, and you're genuinely proud of that. But notice something. Have they ever called just to ask how you're doing? Have they ever shown up for you the way you've shown up for them, even once, without being asked? If the honest answer is no, Machiavelli's sixth law isn't telling you to stop loving them or to cut them off in anger. It's telling you that your generosity toward that specific person has stopped functioning as generosity and started functioning as a subsidy for behavior that will never change as long as the subsidy keeps coming. The shift doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be as simple as a slightly longer pause before you say yes. A question. What have you tried already? Before you solve it for them. A version of help that requires something back, even if that something is just acknowledgement. You'll learn very quickly by their reaction to that small shift exactly how much of the relationship was ever about you at all. Law 7. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. Here it is, the one I told you we were building toward. This is perhaps the most famous, most misunderstood line in all of Machiavelli's work, and I need you to actually understand what he meant, because almost everyone who quotes it gets it wrong. Machiavelli did not say fear is better than love. Read it again. He said it's better to be feared than loved if you cannot have both. The ideal is both. But if you're forced to choose, and life will eventually force you to choose to be respected enough that people don't cross you, rather than loved so desperately that people walk all over you the moment loving you becomes inconvenient for them. Here's why this is the most important law of all 7, and why I made you wait for it. Love, on its own, without respect underneath it, is fragile. It can be withdrawn the moment someone is angry, inconvenienced, or simply distracted by something else. Think about how many people in your life claim to love you, but the moment you set a boundary, the love evaporates, and you're suddenly difficult, too sensitive, not the person they thought you were. That was never stable love. That was conditional affection, and conditional affection collapses under the first real test. But fear, and I want you to understand what Machiavelli actually meant by fear. Because it's not terror, it's not cruelty. What he meant is respect rooted in consequence. People who know that if they cross you, there is an actual cost. People who know you will not chase them, will not beg, will not collapse into desperation if they leave. People who know that disrespecting you has a price. That kind of respect doesn't evaporate when things get hard, because it was never built on convenience in the first place. It was built on the understanding that you are someone who holds their own line. This is why all 6 previous laws funnel into this one. Every law we've covered, not reacting, not explaining, not revealing your next move, recalibrating respect quietly, letting yourself be underestimated, being strategic with generosity. Every single one of those builds toward this exact outcome. A person who cannot be exploited because they have demonstrated consistently that there is a cost to crossing them. People who only chase being loved, who need everyone to like them, who soften every boundary because they're terrified of being seen as harsh. They get walked on. Not because they're not good people, because the world, unfortunately, does not consistently reward goodness on its own. It rewards goodness paired with a spine. I want you to think about the people you respect most in your life. Not just like, respect. I'd guess almost none of them are people who bend instantly under pressure to keep you happy. I'd guess they're people who, somewhere underneath their kindness, have a line you know not to cross, because you've either seen what happens when someone crosses it, or you simply sense it's there. Here is the scenario that makes this real for most people watching right now. Someone you love mistreats you, and you have a choice in that moment that will define the next several years of how they treat you. Option 1, you beg. You explain your hurt feelings, you ask them to understand, you make it clear how much it would cost you to lose them, hoping that the depth of your love will inspire them to change. Option 2, you stay calm. You state clearly what you will and will not accept, and you make it equally clear, through your actual behavior, that you are entirely willing to walk away if the behavior continues. Which version, historically, gets treated better going forward? It's almost never the version that begged. Begging communicates that the relationship's survival depends entirely on your tolerance, which removes all incentive for them to change, because they've already won the only thing they needed: your continued presence, regardless of behavior. The calm, boundaried version communicates that your presence is conditional on respect, and conditional presence, paradoxically, is what makes people actually fight to keep you. That is not coldness. That is not manipulation. That is simply refusing to make yourself so available, so unconditionally loving, that there's no longer any reason for the other person to bring their best self to the relationship. That is the energy of Law 7. And it is the energy that makes every other law in this video actually work, instead of just being nice ideas you nod along to and forget by tomorrow. Let's walk back through all 7 because I want this to actually live in you, not just pass through you. Never react instantly, because reaction is information you're handing to people who don't deserve it. Never explain yourself to people who've already decided not to understand, because explanation is a gift, and gifts are for people who've earned them. Never reveal your next move too early, because silence protects momentum that announcements destroy. Withdraw respect quietly before you withdraw warmth loudly, because quiet recalibration can't be charmed away, but visible coldness can. Let yourself be underestimated, because the energy you'd spend proving people wrong is better spent becoming undeniable. Give generosity strategically, not automatically, because indiscriminate giving trains people to expect, not appreciate. And above everything, be someone who is respected enough that you don't need to be chased after to be valued, because love without a spine underneath it is the most fragile thing in the world, and you deserve to build something sturdier than that for yourself. I want to say something to you directly, one person to another before you go. If you've made it this far in the video, I don't think you're here because you're cold. I don't think you're here because you want to manipulate people or hurt anyone, or become someone unrecognizable to the people who love you. I think you're here because somewhere, at some point, you gave too much to someone who gave nothing back. You explained yourself until your voice was tired, to someone who never once tried to understand you. You reacted, instantly, to people who were waiting for exactly that reaction, so they could use it against you later. And it cost you something. Maybe it cost you a relationship. Maybe it cost you your own sense of self-respect, piece by piece, in ways too small to notice until one day you looked up and didn't recognize how small you'd made yourself trying to be loved by people who were never going to give that back. Machiavelli wrote his laws for princes facing armies and assassins and crumbling kingdoms. Your battlefield looks different. It's the group chat. It's the coworker who smiles to your face. It's the family member who knows exactly which words will make you bleed. But the underlying truth is the same one it's always been. The people who survive, who actually hold power over their own lives, are not the ones who are the kindest or the loudest or the most agreeable. They're the ones who learned, often the hard way, exactly when to stay silent, exactly when to walk away from an explanation no one deserved, and exactly how much of themselves to protect while still being capable of real warmth toward the people who actually earn it. You can be that person, not a cold version of yourself, not a version that's lost its capacity for love, a version that simply, finally, refuses to be the only one in the relationship who's paying attention to the cost. This is only the beginning of what Machiavelli has to teach us about power, about psychology, about the parts of human nature most people are too afraid to look at directly. There is more coming, more laws, more frameworks, more uncomfortable truths that, once you see them, you cannot unsee, and once you apply them, you cannot go back to the version of yourself that gave everything away for free. If this video meant something to you, if even one of these 7 laws hit a nerve, reminded you of someone, reminded you of yourself, do one thing for me right now. Hit that like button. It costs you nothing, and it tells me directly that this is the kind of content you want more of. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so the next video finds you the moment it's out, instead of getting lost in everything else fighting for your attention. Because the next one is coming, and I think it might be the one that changes you the most. I'll see you there.